Australian home values have grown by, look at this, 193%, which is wild. Inflation is at 2.4% 2025. Here's the problem I've got with that. 1 in 5 people in Australia are now on the NDIS. We're now becoming even more unproductive because we're incentivizing poor behavior. So if you want to make money for free, go get disabled. Since August 2022, 72% of all jobs have been into the public sector. So 130 of every 1,000 people now works for the government. In Australia, it's the highest in almost any country in the world. In fact, Australia's at the top. Just when you think Australian government can do nothing stupider, they do something stupider. This is because I'm Lloyd James Ross, 7-figure investor and entrepreneur, and I've helped thousands of business owners and professionals turn financial stress into success. If you're stuck in old money habits, overwhelmed by investing, or unsure where to start, this is for you. I'll give you the mindset and strategies to take control, grow your wealth, and achieve financial freedom. It's time to make your money work for you. The Australian economic crisis explained. That's what this episode is all about. I want to dive deep with you into 7 reasons why it's very obvious that the Australian economy is entering a very rough patch, a challenging period. But I want to explain this to you as best I can in simplest terms so you really try and understand or can at least grasp what is actually happening in this particular country at this time. Now, the things I'm going to explain are happening in other countries as well, but specifically in our country in Australia, where I'm recording this episode, there are some things happening where on the surface, all looks robust. But underneath, when we pull back the curtain, some of these metrics will and should frighten you a little bit because the way we're headed is not going to be a prosperous time for a lot of us, and we're going to hit some challenges. But I want to, more than anything, I want you to understand what's happening in the economy so you can be educated about, well, that's actually what's happening, whereas what you might be thinking or you may be following something else or listening to your neighbor, and it might be that you just don't really understand what's going on at all. So I'm going to use some data, some very current data, to go through these different steps with you and just explain to you each part of it and how it's having an impact on the economy and specifically on you and how it can impact you, all right? So we're going to go with step number 1 first, which is actually the complete illusion of prosperity, all right? So it's really about understanding GDP and GDP per capita. So what GDP stands for is gross domestic product. And in simplest terms, what that means is how much income the country produces. So how productive is the country, all right? So measuring gross domestic product is how the country's performing, but measuring real gross domestic product per capita just means per person, has declined in this country for 6 consecutive quarters, making it, buckle up, the longest per capita recession on record. So when people say, oh, we're not in a recession, because a recession is just 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. But what's happening is we've had declines in GDP per capita. So every single quarter for the last 6 consecutive quarters, we've actually seen your income drop pound for pound relative to what's happening in the world. And it's actually the largest drop in real terms in the Western countries, across all the Western democracies and economies, which is crazy because we were right up there. And now it's falling consecutively, and it's still falling. And I'm looking at a chart here. It peaked in 2022, so right when COVID happened. And since then, well, right in the guts of COVID. And from that point on, it's dropped drastically it's like the index has been measured since 2007, and it was on an upwards trajectory, but now it's just been dropping drastically. So real income per capita is falling by a lot, and has fallen over the last 6 quarters, and it's actually worse than the 1980s recession, the 1970s recession from inflation, and the 1990s recession from the Asian currency crisis or the Japanese currency crisis. So it's now worse, probably about by 3-fold than all of those. So whilst we're not in an actual recession because they're not recording negative GDP growth for the country, we are definitely in that for each person. So what that means is if it feels like you're poorer and you're working the same or harder for less real dispensable or disposable income, it's because you are. And what's caused that is the next step. So what's the cause of this? Why has this happened? You got to think about Australia being a productive country, and what happens in Australia is this: generally we take resources and we export them. That's really how we make a lot of our money. We're actually the richest country in the world from a resource perspective. So we should also be the richest per capita, but we're not because the policy is ineffective. The policy is the government, and the way the economy is working currently, it's not all the government's fault, it's not producing for the citizens, okay? We can't just conjure up legislation to do that. So we're kind of stuck in this Westminster democracy system. Plus, we're stuck in the private sector and the public sector and policy. It's a bit of a nightmare. So, whilst we're the richest, we're also the poorest. We're poorest in sense of the growth in our personal income is falling, all right? So, this one thing has caused a lot of it, especially at a personal level. Here's what it is. Over the past 2 decades, okay, so the last 20 years, Australian home values have grown by, look at this, in the last 193%, which by and large is not a bad thing, okay? But here's where it sucks for anyone who lives here, who's lived here for the last 2 decades, right? So back then I was 21, so I was just entering my career. And so what's happened is prices in property have 2x'd, right? Which is wild. So in fact, they've probably 3x'd. A 200% return means they've doubled and doubled again. So if a property is worth 500,000 back then, it's doubled to $1 million, doubled again, so it's 2 million, right? But while that's been happening, this is where it gets wild. While that's been happening, wages have only grown by 81% in the last 20 years. So for example, if you were on $100,000 a year 20 years ago, which was considered a six-figure salary back then was considered amazing. Like, oh, you're on 6 figures? You're in middle class. You're a high-end middle class. You're going on family holidays. You got a house. You probably paid it. You're doing well, really well. But over that time, the wages didn't do what property did. So property, basically, let's call it 200%. Wages didn't go to 200,000 to 400,000. They didn't. They grew by 81%. So your 100K went to 180K. Got it? But property went from 500,000 to 2 million. So your wages and wage growth, call it, 3.5% per year, that's happened. But properties have gone at like 7 to 8% a year. It's just not catching it. And so what has happened too is rents have gone up at not quite the same rate, thankfully, but they've gone up as well with the price of properties. And so you're seeing this massive disparity. Now, let's think about that for a second. What if we scale out another 20 years and do another 200%, another 80%? We're going to get more of a disparity, and so less people being able to actually afford shelter. Not own a home, listen up very closely. Actually afford shelter. And I was listening to a survival expert recently, I forget what show it was on YouTube, and they actually had this question. They said, what are the 3 most important human needs in nature? Like, what are the 3 things that if you don't get, you die? I'm like, oh, that's easy to answer that question. They're like, what is it? I'm like, water. If you don't go for water for 3 days, you die. You learn this when you're in school at like, grade 4 flipping geography. You learn, whatever it is you're in, what class. You learn pretty fast, outdoor education, that if you don't have water in 3 days, you die, right? We all know this. Then, second is food. If you don't get food for 3 weeks, you die. Now, that's how I grew up and that's what I learned, but it's wrong. The one basic human need, if you're in nature and you need to survive and you don't get it first, you die. And it is shelter. Shock. I was like, what? Why? How? Because of things like exposure. Hypothermia, right, can cook you. Well, it doesn't cook you, hypothermia. It does the opposite. Hypothermia can freeze you to death. Right? And if you don't get shelter, you're exposed to the elements. If you go without shelter for 3 days, the impact to your body is irreparable. It can really kill you. So think about that. We're actually making shelter the number one human need. We're making it unaffordable for our citizens. I've never said this before, but it's a flipping disgrace. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. We should be, the fact that there's not many, we just take it on the chin, right? It's not, and if you're one of these people who's have taken this, have risen or have floated up on this high tide of property prices, and you're all high and mighty, well, that's great for you. But what about your children and grandchildren? Like, I think about my niece and nephew. Like, what are they going to do? You think, oh, we'll plug at them. We've got wealth in our family. Well, that's a very narcissistic, arrogant approach to take. Our senior generation, or the policies being made in this country, are not supportive of young people in the next generation. It's a disgrace. It's disgusting. Politicians should be limited to one house. They shouldn't be incentivized to buy multiple houses, because they can make policy that pumps property prices. They can immigrate this country away. They're doing it right now. Okay, we'll come to that in a second. So the reason why that's happening, the reason why this happened is two reasons why property prices are way outperforming wages. It's because of this. Firstly, interest rates in the 70s were at about 17% because they had to break inflation, right? Paul Volcker came out. He was the chair of the Federal Reserve in America. And the world was kind of sitting at high interest rates of 17%. And what he had to do was he had to lift rates up to get inflation back down. And he lifted rates to 17%. And when he did that, what happened was, when you raise interest, this is an absolute economic policy. If you've ever studied any level of macroeconomics, this is an absolute fact. It's physics. It's mathematical, which means it's not up for dispute. But when rates go up, and by rates I mean the interest rate at the Reserve Bank, when it goes up, the value of assets falls, because the value of the future cash flows discounted back at a discount rate. It's called the time value of money. When you discount those future cash flows back to a net present value today, the net present value formula, which is a mathematical formula you learn in any finance education, right? When you discount them back at a higher interest rate, the current value of the property or the asset, whatever it is, shares, property, bonds, is less today. Let me just rephrase that for you so you understand. When you have a high interest rate and you discount the future cash flows back from the future to today's value using a high interest rate, it means the asset is a lower value. So that's why in 1990, when rates were at 17%, property prices were very low compared to your wage. In fact, 2 to 3 times annual wages. So if you were making 50 grand back then, a property was about 100,000 to 150,000. Very affordable. Everyone was buying. It was easy to pay it off. No dramas. Okay? That's fine. That's actually 3 to 4 times earnings is a nice fair value. And in America right now, it's about 4.5, which is very reasonable. Okay? In Australia, it's 13 times earnings. And in Japan in the 90s, before the great big property bubble back then for Japan, it was at 18 times earnings. So we're not too far off. Anyway, so back in 1990, when rates were all-time highs, property prices were all-time lows. But guess what happened in the last 30 years? Yes, you guessed it. Rates went from 17% to 1%, 1.25%, from 17 to 1. So what happens when you drop rates? It does this. It does this. So when you drop rates, you lift asset prices. That's because the future cash flows are discounted back at a lower rate, which means the asset value is worth more. So you haven't been in a property boom. You've been in a rate reduction cycle of 30 years. And you didn't create that. You're not a genius. You're not that smart. You just bought. It's the timing. Arguably, honestly, it's luck. You happen to be born in the 1960s. That is the ovarian lottery. You didn't plan that. You fluked it. And now you're like, oh, I'm a flipping property investor. Oh, well, let's see what happens when interest rates go back up. They used to be at 7.5%, which is about roughly on average in the last 1,000 years what they've been at. It's only recently, because of COVID, that they really, and the GFC, that they really dropped them so drastically. It's truthfully, like it's only recent. In fact, interest rates got as low as they've ever been for 5,000 years in your lifetime. So think about it. What happens when rates go back up? Yes, the value of your real estate falls. Welcome to the party. You get it. What's holding it up and propping it up unnaturally is we're immigrating 600,000 people to this country every single year. The average over the last 10 years was about 200,000, so it's tripled. So of course you're going to have stress on the infrastructure and the housing of the country because you're not building enough houses to house them. And it's just, and it just doesn't need to happen. It's a policy that can be stopped immediately by government. But the reason why they're doing it is because they don't want to face a recession, because they don't want to get out of power. And they also, guess what? They own half a dozen houses themselves. It should be bloody banned, I tell you, for them to have houses because they're making policy to pump their own bloody equity up. It's an absolute, I'm disgusted. You can't tell. Disgusted. So that's what's happened. Now, when rates go back up and your value falls, yes, a rising tide lifts all boats, okay? So when we have a rising tide, that's happened, you don't know who's swimming naked until the tide goes out. But when rates go back up, the tide, my friends, will go back out and you'll see who's swimming naked. Swimming naked means this. You will see who's got leverage out to their eyeballs. You will see very quickly who's got 10 properties fully geared to their eyeballs. Because when rates go back up, and they will, because the bond yields are going up, which we'll talk about in a second, they won't be able to escape. Because when everyone runs for the exit, they ain't getting out. Because when everyone tries to sell their property at the same time, it doesn't end well, okay? All right, so dwellings have risen faster than wages, long term. Third part, mortgage stress and household budgets. So interestingly at the moment, by the numbers, these are crazy numbers, okay? So the data points are this. Previous to the recent bubble in real estate and the policy and immigration, the average percentage of your household income that went to paying your mortgage was about 30%, okay? About 30%. And that's fairly reasonable, right? But now it's 49%, which means if you've got a household that's earning $200,000, let's say both the woman and the man are making $100,000 each, okay? 6 figures. And they're sending the kids to daycare because they're both working. They can't afford to, stay home and look after the kids. So let's say net into if they've got one child, it's $25,000 a year. So if they've got 2 kids, it's $50,000. Now they do get some rebates from the government. So let's call it $20,000. So they're really making $180,000 combined. That's before tax. After tax, probably about $120,000, let's say. So you've got $120,000 coming in. That's around about $2,500 a week, right? Think about that. Listen to this very closely because you've got to pay your mortgage with after-tax dollars, not before-tax dollars. So out of the $2,500 a week, $1,250 is going to the mortgage. And then the family's supposed to live off $1,250. Are you kidding me? And then groceries of $300. So no wonder people are struggling. No wonder they're telling the government, please reduce interest rates. Because they can't afford their mortgage, right? Because they're coming to the market and they're buying at all-time highs with borrowings and they're both strapped because they're both already working, kids in childcare. There's nowhere else to go. We're cooking our citizens. It's a flipping disaster. It's a joke, right? So it'll now check this out. It'll now take 21 to 46 years to save up, not for the whole property, for the deposit, for an entry-level home. And the mortgage will take 63% of the median income yearly. That's where we're headed, right? So the income debt to income ratio and the mortgage rate is getting out of control, okay? Just quickly, if you're ready to take control of your finances but feel stuck on where to start, I have a solution. My book, Money Buys Happiness, simplifies investing and wealth building with practical steps to help you achieve financial peace. Get your copy via the link in the show notes and let's get your money working for you. Now back to the episode. Number 4. This is also what's happening at the same time. Do you see why the economy is in crisis? It's going to come home to roost. It ain't good. I personally think we should take the recession on the chin, stop immigrating people, shift our energy policy to nuclear so we can reduce energy costs because that inflates everything. And we need to stop bringing people so we can just let the housing supply catch up a little bit. And of course, we need to increase interest rates, not bring them down because we need to have the recession we need to have. We all need to take it on the chin and realize that this country cannot go through decades and decades of no recession. It's not. We need to have one. It's like when you have a bushfire. It's like, oh, it's beautiful and green and everything's going well. Well, sometimes you need a bushfire to come through and get rid of the foliage, okay? That's what we need. We haven't had one in this country for so long, and they're preventing it and preventing it. They're kicking the can down the road. And it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. So when it really happens, it's going to be even worse. So occasionally you need a bushfire because you need these new roots to come through, right? Capitalism needs to have resets, and we haven't had it because we're turning into a socialist economy, which I'll come to. Now, number 4, inflation reality versus official figures. Now, inflation is where the price of goods and services goes up. Rent, petrol, groceries, etc., right? So there's they're saying that inflation is at 2.4% 2025. Here's the problem I've got with that. If you go back, I would say, look, let's even go back 5 years. Yeah, five or 6 years, okay? A maxi bond I'm calling it the maxi bond index, where I measure, because I love maxi bonds. Like I'll go to the BP and if I want to like spoil myself with a dessert, my wife Alicia knows it's a maxi bond, okay? Because here's why. You get the best of both worlds. You get the nice creamy chocolate with the outside exterior and you get the nice soft sandwich on the other side. It's a win-win, okay? You get a double hit, right? Inside tip. So I've got this maxi bond index. I used to go in, get a maxi bond. It was $3.30 for a maxi bond. Fair, kind of annoying, but fair. Now, if inflation was at 3%, okay, it would take, the rule of 72 suggests, if I take 72 divided by 3, it'll tell me how long it takes for that maxi bond to double in price, okay, inflation. So 72 divided by 3 would be around about 25. Is that right? No, yeah, 24. Let's just go with 24, okay? So you see 366? Yeah, it's exactly 24, rather than number. So 24, so 72 divided by 3% inflation rate equals 24 years. So, if inflation was really 3%, using the exact rule of 72 that is not even disputable, go and research it. Okay, I did an episode on it. Go watch my episode. Okay, it takes 24 years for the maxi bond to double in price. You with me? So, here are the facts. I went into the BP recently, and to my shock horror, I was disgusted to find out that my maxi bond at a BP service station was $6.60. It has doubled, not in 24 years as it should if inflation 3%, it has doubled in about 5 years. So if we take the rule of 72, divided by 5 years equals 14%. Thanks, Soph. 14%. So inflation, you telling me it's 3%? I've got proof from my maxi bond index from the BP service station. That's full of BS. The inflation rate in the last 5 years has been about 14%. So if it feels like you are poorer, it's because you are. Because what's happening in this country is instead of increasing interest rates and having the recession we have to have, what they're doing is printing money, yes, to supply the money. Because if bond yields are high, without going into much detail, and you want to and you've got country debt, and you want to refinance the debt, you don't want interest rates to be high because then the country's got to pay more interest. So they like to artificially keep interest rates in the country low. They like to do it because it keeps the country's debt financing low, okay? But the problem with that is that they print more money. They supply the country with more money. And people, they make money through banks, okay? And if people are borrowing more money to buy property, they're making more money. So they're printing more money. They're putting it out in circulation. In which case, we're inflating away our dollar. They're calling it the Pacific peso, the Australian dollar. And most countries are doing this with the fiat currency. That's why things like shitcoin and crypto are becoming more popular because people are trying to hedge themselves against this. If I was going to choose any hedge outside stocks, which I prefer, and outside even property, which is still better than the other two I'm going to mention, gold and crypto. That's why gold's becoming so popular. It's shot up because people are trying to hedge the inflating away the currency, okay? So the reality of inflation versus the official figures is absolutely completely different. So your $100,000 income used to be worth $100,000 5 years ago. Now, fact, I think it's worth 50. So you've lost purchasing power of your dollar by up to, it's fallen by 50%. How about that? In fact, it's 100% worse because 50,000 into 100,000 is 100%. So if it feels like you're doubly poor, it's because you literally are. Okay, I'm bringing you this data from the field. This is not like something I'm making up. So 5, superannuation tax changes. Now, what's happening is lately they've announced this superannuation change, the government, whereas if you've got a balance over $3 million, any capital gains associated with that particular portfolio of assets, you have to pay taxes for the year on unrealized capital gains. That means it's the capital gains you haven't realized yet, meaning you haven't sold the asset and realized the capital gain. So they're going to tax you on the unrealized gains, which is the most idiotic, stupid, dumbest thing that the government's ever done because you can't even, how are we going to force people who've got balances over 3 million to sell their commercial property just to pay you 1 year of tax? It's the dumbest thing ever. They're not going to be able to manage it. It's just going to be a nightmare. But because it's not indexed, which means 3 million in 20 years is going to stay as is. So 3 million. Because of inflation, everyone's going to have a superannuation balance of 3 million, which means the government's going to actually tax everyone's super eventually. They're coming after your money. They like to, the government, we've got a Westminster system in this country, and it's not like America. People are like, oh yeah, free speech and home of the brave. It's not us. We're a convict nation. We are a nation of rule followers. And so we're like the proverbial frog in the pot that's getting boiled over time. And we're just taking it on the chin, right? There's no uprising here. But what's happening is the Liberal government in this country, meaning the LNP, the Labor, Liberal, we got a different round in Australia. The Labor government, which is very liberal in its policy, it's got socialist style policy. Okay, and in fact, if you go back and you do enough digging, you find that the Prime Minister has even got some ties to communism. Okay, without getting into detail, I feel like I'm on a Joe Rogan podcast here. But what that means is he's more towards socialism, meaning take from the rich, give to the poor. But the problem with it is you're actually now making the poor dependent on you. So what's happening is people are now becoming dependent on the government to save them, which is very bad for them long term, because if you're in that place and you're depending on the government to save you, what's going to happen is they're going to tax and give. So they're taxing the productive people in the country and they're giving to the unproductive. Okay? And what's happened lately is things like NDIS, which I believe in, I think we need, for people in this country who are really struggling, who have a disability that is absolutely life-altering, we should have some sort of national support if we can afford it for them. But what's happened is, as soon as you show someone they can get money for nothing, people start to also accidentally be disabled. Now, this is the facts. 1 in 5 people in Australia are now on the NDIS, which means 1 in 5 people are disabled. Now, if you wind the clock back 10, 20 years, I bet it wasn't even close to that figure. But because they know there's free money on the table, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. And now what's happening is we're now becoming even more unproductive because we're incentivizing poor behavior. We're incentivizing disablement. So if you want to make money for free, go get disabled. Do anything in your power, mental health, whatever it is you can conjure up, go get some money from the government. Free money. That's what we're doing. This is shocking, right? So superannuation taxes have changed. NDIS, where they're taking the taxes they're raising is changing things, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. Number 6, employment trends and productivity. Right now, check this out. Since August 2022, 72% of all jobs have been into the public sector. So 130 of every 1,000 people now works for the government. If there's a chart here, working in on state, okay, the chart here, check this out. It puts Australia at the amount of public sector workers per 1,000 people. And again, as I said, it's 130 in every 1,000 now works for the government. In Australia, it's the highest in almost any country in the world. In fact, Australia's at the top. More than Israel, Britain, France, Spain, United States, Brazil, Turkey, Argentina, Mexico, Thailand, etc. We are at the very top for how many people work for government. We are slowly becoming a government working country entirely. So we are moving towards a level of what would be considered communism, where you actually only work for the state. Okay? And last time I checked, didn't work out so good for North Korea. Now, what's interesting with China, it is communist driven, so it's state owned, but it's a capitalist society. I think personally it's more capitalistic than us at this present time. Scary to think that. People are like, what happens if the Chinese invade? I'm like, well, they're doing a pretty good job running their country. It wouldn't be a bad thing because they'd run this country better than what we do. Fact. Anyway, I love Australia. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm just annoyed, right? As you can tell with the tonality of this episode, because I grew up in this country and it's been a country of free. It's been a wonderful country, but now they're turning it into a dog's breakfast, and I'm annoyed. That's why I'm doing this episode, to educate you on what's actually happening. This is crazy. Number 7, energy and exports. This is mental. We actually are the richest country in the world, right? Check this out. Australia exports 35 times more gas than the shortage of gas projected in the 2030s. So we've got projected average annual shortage of gas in this country. The projected shortfall is 2.3 megatons, is it? And we export 82 megatons. We're exporting 35 times what our current national shortage is. What the? This cunt. What did someone say the other day? Just when you think Australian government can do nothing stupider, they do something stupider. And now this is because there's this narrative being pushed, and it's been pushed from this thing called global warming, and they changed it to climate change, and it's a national, it's a global narrative. And what's happening now is recently they discovered there was new ice at the polar caps. And they're discovering that they said the water is going to rise, and there's now absolute, like if you go down to the water of all those places they said we're going to be underwater, they're not. So it's actually not real. It's just made up. At some point it might have been thought that was happening, but now it's actually shown that it's probably happening. If it is happening, it's probably happening so slow that we can't even really see it, and it's not such a national or global tragedy. Now, the reason why that's a problem is because clean energy policies are now turning into a problem, because if it's wind energy and it's certain energy that it's not coal or nuclear, they call it clean energy. But the problem is it's actually making energy more expensive in this country, which means lately energy prices have gone up by 10%. So it's like, oh, I got hit with more energy costs. What the hell's going on? It's because the government is hell-bent on going to net zero, which is just a stupid policy. Look, go and explore solar, wind, do it. But don't just go, we're just going to jump ship and stop supplying, hydrocarbons as well. I mean, you transition over time, but this ridiculous time frame it's now becoming not even really that important, because we're realizing we're not really cooking the planet as much as what we thought. Now, how that impacts you is, for a country that's got all this incredible abundance of resources, why are we paying $1,000 a quarter for energy? We're just making our citizens poorer, okay? So that's the 7. I hope that makes sense. We're at a crossroads here, okay? We've got the Australian bond yield rising. They're trying to drop in. They just dropped interest rates the other day, again. But they need to put them up, not down. And I'm fairly certain we're going to come to a crossroad where we're going to be forced to make these changes, and it's going to be gnarly, right? Because we cannot continue with 13 times earnings for houses. Our kids are going to suffer. The next generations, we're leaving it in just a terrible place. We need to take some responsibility for it. Now, hopefully that happens. Well, last time I checked, I couldn't change government, nor am I trying to. Elon Musk just tried to change the government in the United States. He's finding that very hard. I'm not suggesting I can change government here, but what I'm wanting to do is just educate you a bit, because if you're feeling like things are getting a little bit worse for you, statistically they are, but that's not a get out of jail free card. I don't want you just to use that as an excuse. What I want you to do is understand, based on the facts that I've shared with you here today on this episode, is I want you to understand where you're at, and I want you to understand what's coming, and I want you to now take ownership of what you're going to do to increase your income, reduce your debt, take ownership of your family's future, because if you depend on the government, I'm here to tell you it's just going to get worse and worse and worse until we get some sort of reasonable leadership, okay? Especially when there's more people coming and it's more competitive. So there's never been a more important time to get financially educated, start actually learning to increase your income, drop your debt, learn to invest. Because if you don't learn to invest in assets that hedge inflation, if you don't learn to do these things now, you're going to get inflated away. You're going to be off the list of people that can even afford to live in this country, and you may need to consider living in a place that you don't even like. And you may even consider having to board with other families. This is going to get dire. So there's never been a more important time to educate yourself financially. So go check out our links in our YouTube. Go check out me on Instagram. Go and start beginning your education journey. Go and check out some other episodes, the next episode even, on the Money Grows on Trees video podcast on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel, share this with a friend, and start educating yourself and your kids on what's going to happen and what you should be doing to still, as best you can, dominate your own personal household finances, so that you're at least ahead of the game here when this country starts going down and down and down, further and further. I hope it doesn't happen. You know what? I hope I'm wrong, right? I hope I'm wrong, but I'm not giving you personal opinion. All I'm sharing with you on this episode is data, okay? It's just data. And so you can take with it and do with it what you want, but I want to make sure this podcast gives you no BS approach to financial education and what's happening with your own finances. So I hope that makes sense. And if you've enjoyed the episode, if you have, share it with a friend, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Money Grows on Trees podcast. Thanks for listening to Money Grows on Trees. If you enjoyed the episode, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube so you never miss an episode. And if you're serious about building wealth, make sure to check out the links in the show notes and follow me on all social media platforms at Lloyd James Ross for more. See you in the next episode.